What if the truth about humanity's origin was never lost, but buried on purpose? What if we were not born on Earth but returned here after we fell? And what if, inside one man's blood, the memory of all mankind began to stir again? Tonight, we follow Dr. Elias Hume, an archaeologist who touches a mysterious stone in the Atacama Desert and awakens something far more ancient than Earth itself. A spiral hidden in our DNA. A voice from a time before time. A signal that was never meant to be heard again. But the more Elias remembers, the more the world begins to break. What happens when remembering becomes dangerous? What happens when the truth rewrites what it means to be human? Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about aliens, or gods, or ancient civilizations. This is the story of us and the question that changes everything. Were we ever truly human, or just the echo of something forgotten? The wind over Atacama was a quiet whisper against a silence that had lasted for centuries. Beneath the thin orange veil of dust and sun-bleached stones, the earth cradled secrets not yet meant for man. Dr. Elias Hume wiped the sweat from his brow as he knelt beside a shallow pit dug into the heart of the desert, where something unlike anything he had ever seen emerged from the soil, not a bone, nor a shard of pottery, but a shape that defied time itself. It wasn't the size of the object that struck him first, but the shape. Resting partially embedded in the dirt was a smooth, dark stone, no larger than a human skull, but carved with delicate precision, grooves and lines forming spirals, fractals, and strange geometric symbols that pulsed faintly beneath the desert sunlight. The texture resembled basalt but shimmered like obsidian in certain angles. Yet the way it was shaped, it resembled something terrifyingly familiar. A brain. Not exactly human, but close enough to stir a chill along Elias's spine. His assistant, Marta, had whispered, "It looks alive," and even she seemed ashamed to admit it aloud. But she was not wrong. As the stone was fully unearthed, Elias saw that its underside was smooth and rounded, as if it had been placed gently in that spot, not buried by time, but left deliberately, waiting. They ran scans. Carbon dating returned nonsense. The equipment flickered, glitched, then refused to register a reading at all. Metallurgical analysis was inconclusive. The material was unknown, unclassifiable, resisting categorization like it was, rejecting being understood. But it was that night, under the piercing stars of the high desert, that Elias made the mistake, or perhaps the choice that would change everything. Drawn by something he couldn't explain, he returned alone to the dig site. The stone sat quietly on a slab of cloth, reflecting starlight that shimmered too brightly, too knowingly. Elias knelt, extended a hesitant hand, and let his fingertips graze the surface. And the world shifted. Not physically, not like a quake or a tremor, but as if reality itself exhaled and blinked. His vision swam, not from heat, but from something older, deeper. In that moment, a soft vibration crawled into his bones, and a faint hum echoed behind his ears. A resonance, like a thought that wasn't his own, stirred within him. He recoiled at first, breath caught in his throat, but something compelled him, something inside the stone or behind it, something watching. It wasn't a sound. Not truly. It was a pulse. A signal. Not electromagnetic, not audio, but a transmission meant for consciousness itself. Something that reached past the limits of language, beyond logic or dream. It whispered not in words but in impressions, memory, longing, design. Elias fell to his knees, overwhelmed by images not his own, flickers of a night sky unlike Earth's, a domed structure of black crystal floating in silence, beings of light bending over pools of shimmering matter. His mind tried to resist, to rationalize, to shove the visions away, but the stone had already found him. It had waited. It had chosen. When he awoke hours later, the sun was rising. The stone lay cold beside him. Marta and the rest of the team found him unconscious, half buried in sand, mumbling phrases in a language none could place, a tongue forgotten before the first civilizations were born. But one word, repeated again and again, chilled them more than any desert night ever could. Remembrance. The night after the discovery settled over the camp like a thick curtain, suffocating in its silence. No one spoke of the way the stone made their hands tremble when they carried it. No one mentioned the strange malfunctioning of equipment, or the way animals in the distance had fallen quiet, as if the desert itself had paused to listen. The artifact, now housed in a secure tent wrapped in layers of foil and fabric, sat still under low artificial light, but there was a weight in the air that pressed down on everything, a heaviness that made even breathing feel intrusive. Dr. Elias Hume couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the canvas roof above him, lit softly by the moon outside. His thoughts circled like vultures around the moment his fingers touched the stone. That feeling hadn't left him. It had settled into his chest like a vibration just beneath the surface of his skin. The others assumed he'd had heat stroke, perhaps hallucinations. But Elias knew better. What he'd experienced wasn't imagined. It was transmission. He was sure of it. At 2:46 a.m., Elias sat up suddenly, sweat clinging to his back despite the cold air. A low hum filled his ears again, the same frequency he'd felt before, now stronger. It didn't come from outside. It came from within. The tent, the desert, the stars overhead, they all seemed to blur, background noise compared to the sound threading its way into his mind. Not noise, not really. It was a presence. A voice without language, a tone that wrapped around his thoughts and squeezed. He stumbled outside, drawn as if sleepwalking, and returned to the tent where the stone was kept. Inside, the air was warmer than it should have been. The stone sat at the center of a metal table, inert and silent. But Elias felt it before he even crossed the threshold, a throb, like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. As he approached, the light above it flickered once, then held steady. He stood over the artifact, breath shallow, eyes locked on the impossibly intricate carvings that adorned its surface. For a moment, everything was still. Then came the voice. Not in the tent. Not aloud. It came from inside him, slipping through the cracks of his awareness like oil into water. It wasn't words. It was pressure, emotion, and something more, something old. He felt a sorrow so vast it threatened to collapse him, layered with a love that was never human, and a regret that echoed through lifetimes. The stone was speaking. Not as a being, but as a vessel. A container of thought. A memory archive. Elias saw flashes, brief, stabbing images behind his eyes. A sky the color of dark amber. Structures rising from black oceans like crystalline towers. And beings tall, luminous, shifting, walking in silence among stars. Their thoughts were light, and their words were shape. They didn't speak as we do, they remembered. And remembrance was communication. The stone held their memories. Not recordings, not data, but living echoes. And as Elias listened, something began to awaken in him. He wasn't just hearing them. He was remembering with them. Somehow, whatever this stone was, it had found resonance with his mind. The geometry on its surface wasn't decoration. It was a map. A language. A door. His knees buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of the table, panting, heart racing. The images vanished. The tent was quiet again. But his mind wasn't. He could feel the voice still whispering underneath everything like a radio signal tuned just beneath awareness. It wasn't done with him. Later, when he tried to write down what he'd felt, no words sufficed. He only managed to scrawl 2 phrases into his journal before his hand began to shake uncontrollably. The first read, "It remembers everything." And beneath it, written with less clarity, but equal urgency, "And now, so do I." That night, the air in the desert grew colder than it should have. Even wrapped in blankets inside his tent, Elias felt a chill that didn't come from outside. It lived beneath his skin. After what had happened with the stone, he didn't speak to anyone. He had tried, once, to explain what he'd felt, the voices, the images, the sorrow, but the words had sounded like madness the moment they left his mouth. So he stayed quiet, observing, listening, and most of all, waiting. Because something inside him knew, it wasn't over. When he finally drifted into sleep, it wasn't sleep as humans know it. He didn't dream in fragments or symbols. Instead, the darkness behind his eyes opened like a window, and he stepped into something vast. He stood not in a dreamscape, but in memory not his own, but living, breathing, structured like a real world. Above him stretched a sky that shifted slowly in color, from gold to deep green to a black speckled with patterns that moved like thought. Beneath his feet, a surface that wasn't stone, but memory shaped into terrain. It responded to his attention, shifting form with his emotion. The ground pulsed. A rhythm. Like breath. Like a heart. And then he heard it again, the hum. But this time, it was not faint. It was everywhere. In the air, in the sky, in his bones. And with it came understanding, not in words, but in weight, like knowledge pressing against the inside of his skull. Figures appeared. Tall, radiant, not made of flesh but of motion and symmetry. They stood in silence, but he understood them. Not through language, but through resonance. They looked at him not with eyes, but with presence. And then, one of them extended a hand not toward him, but toward the space between them. And in that space unfolded an image, the forming of Earth, not as science describes it, but as design. A blue sphere shaped by will. And around it, seated vessels of light descending. Elias saw it all. Not as a movie, but as an inheritance. He saw them create the oceans with long pulses of sound. He saw them mold genetic patterns like clay. He saw the first humans not born, but assembled pieces of memory given shape. They were not gods. They were architects. And they had not created humanity to worship them, but to continue them. A vessel for something greater. But something had gone wrong. He saw a split. A division among the architects. One faction wished to give humans their own memory to let them evolve freely. The other feared what we might become. The second group severed the memory line. They buried the stones. They hid the truth. And they left. Or were made to leave. Elias's breath caught as he realized the stone wasn't just memory. It was a key. A reactivation. And his mind had become the receiver. The pulse wasn't a symptom. It was a signal. A countdown. A return. When he awoke, gasping, he was no longer in his tent. Somehow, he had wandered out during the night. He lay under the open sky, the stone resting beside him as if it had followed. Or led. He stared up at the stars, and for a moment, they didn't look random. They looked, arranged. Like a map. Like a warning. And echoing in the back of his mind, behind the silence of dawn, was the pulse. Not loud, but constant. Like a memory trying to become real again. For days, Elias kept the stone close. Not out of fear, nor curiosity, but necessity. The dreams returned each night, and they no longer felt like dreams, they unfolded like memories he never lived, but somehow remembered. Every time he closed his eyes, the same world awaited him. The golden black sky, the breathing ground, the luminous figures. But now, the dreams lasted longer. They held him in their gravity. He stopped trying to wake. He wanted to stay. In one of these lucid nights, the memory did not begin with landscapes. It began inside a vast chamber of light, walls formed from a crystalline substance that bent space like rippling water. Floating in the center was a form. At first, it was only light flickering, shifting, but then it condensed into structure. A body. Not human, but not entirely alien either. It had no eyes, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. It had no mouth, yet Elias felt words echo within him. You are of us, and not of us. You are memory, waiting to remember. The being raised an arm, and the chamber around Elias dissolved, giving way to something beyond comprehension. He was standing in the middle of what looked like a fabrication hall, but not made of machines. Everything here was grown. Vats of liquid shimmered with forms suspended within. Proto-humans. Not born, constructed. Each one slightly different. Some were tall, some slender, some with elongated skulls or mirrored eyes. And above them all hovered tendrils of glowing filaments, memory strands. He realized they weren't building bodies. They were embedding purpose. Encoding thought before life began. He was witnessing the birth of mankind, not as evolution, but as intention. Elias watched the architects move among the bodies. They did not speak. They did not instruct. They touched. And with that touch came structure, not only of muscle and tissue, but of belief, instinct, curiosity, and fear. Elias saw the first spark of rebellion formed long before the first breath. It was placed there. A fragment of independence. A seed of divergence. One of the architects turned toward him, its form now stabilizing into something more readable, tall, slender, with skin like woven metal and a skull that pulsed with color. It stepped forward and reached out, pressing its hand against Elias's chest. Elias felt his body freeze. A rush surged through his mind, data, images, sound, sensation, as if centuries of experience were being forced into a vessel too small. His eyes burned behind their lids, his spine arched, and in that moment, he saw himself not in human form, but as light. A reflection. A duplicate. A continuation. He screamed. The memory snapped. He awoke not in his tent, but on the stone floor of the archaeological shelter, arms shaking, nose bleeding, the artifact glowing faintly beside him. Marta ran in, horrified, asking what happened. Elias couldn't speak at first. His voice had changed, deeper, slower, as if trying to relearn the patterns of speech. His body felt foreign. Not possessed, but rewritten. Later that night, when he stood alone by the stone, staring into its patterns, a terrifying clarity washed over him. These beings, these architects of flesh, had not just created mankind. They had preserved fragments of themselves inside us. Each human, a mirror. Each memory, a locked door. And Elias was the first key turned in thousands of years. He wasn't chosen. He was triggered. The next time Elias closed his eyes, he didn't fall asleep, he was taken. Not violently. Not even forcefully. But gently, as if the fabric of space folded around his consciousness and cradled it like a newborn. He didn't resist. The pulse inside his bones had become a rhythm he could no longer separate from his own heartbeat. He was no longer merely dreaming. He was remembering something older than history, something buried in the genetic ash of mankind. He opened his eyes, not his physical eyes, but something deeper, behind them, and found himself standing beneath an alien sky that bent in impossible hues. It was both day and night. Stars glowed like lanterns through a transparent dome of atmosphere, while sunlight filtered down in slow waves like liquid gold. Before him stretched a garden not chaotic and wild like Earth's forests, but perfectly symmetrical. Every tree was placed with intention. The grass shimmered in subtle pulses, responding to his presence. The air was warm, but it did not move. There was no wind. Only breath. The garden was breathing. But it wasn't Eden. It wasn't paradise. It was precision. A construct. A habitat woven from organic design and synthetic control. The trees bore fruit that glowed with inner light. Pools of water mirrored not the sky above, but memories, each surface shifting to reveal scenes of faces, places, decisions never made. Elias walked slowly through the landscape, and the ground hummed beneath each step, acknowledging him. Welcoming him. Testing him. In the center of the garden stood a structure, not a temple, not a throne, but something in between. It was grown from the same material as the chamber he had seen before: crystal, bone, light. Inside, he found them, the first constructs. The original human prototypes. They stood in silence, their skin pale as clouded glass, their eyes closed, hands open by their sides. Not sleeping. Waiting. Each of them bore a symbol on their chest, a spiraling fractal made of light. Elias recognized it. He had seen it reflected in the stone. And, disturbingly, in his own dreams, on his own chest. A voice emerged again. Not from outside. From within. This was the first memory. The controlled garden. The shaping of will. We gave you light and silence. We gave you order. The words came not in sound but through sensation, a clarity that skipped language entirely and embedded meaning into the spine. Elias stepped forward, looking at the nearest construct. As he approached, its eyes opened. They were not eyes in the human sense, they were pools of memory, swirling with thousands of moments. The construct spoke with no mouth. Its voice filled the space between thoughts. We were meant to carry the song. But the song fractured. You are the echo. And then Elias was no longer standing in the garden. He was in it, inside its purpose. He felt what the architects had felt when they designed it. Not love. Not cruelty. But intention. The garden was not meant to be a paradise. It was a calibration chamber. A tuning fork for the human spirit. Every fruit, every sound, every beam of light was designed to nudge the human mind toward a specific frequency, one that would resonate with the architect's own essence. They hadn't just created life. They had sculpted consciousness. But something went wrong. Elias felt it ripple through the memory. A deviation. One construct, one anomaly did not resonate correctly. It began asking questions not encoded in its design. It did not sing. It screamed. And from that single note of defiance, the echo spread into generations, into language, into the refusal to obey. The garden became a prison. Then a myth. Then forgotten. Elias staggered back into himself, gasping. The image of the garden dissolved, but its scent lingered, a sweetness he couldn't name, like time blooming in reverse. His hands trembled. He looked down at his palm, and for a split second, thought he saw the same spiral glowing beneath his skin, then gone. He whispered into the quiet of the desert night, "We were never meant to remember Eden. Because Eden wasn't meant to last." The next vision did not come like a dream, nor like a memory. It arrived like a storm. Elias had not yet closed his eyes when it seized him. One moment he stood in the field near the dig site, breathing in the silence of the stars. The next, the sky above him cracked open, not with light, but with awareness. A fracture in time and thought, and through it, he was pulled into a memory so powerful it felt like a soul being rewritten. He stood inside a colossal hall suspended in the void, its architecture not bound by gravity or shape. Columns flowed upward like liquid frozen in motion, glowing with veins of light that pulsed in perfect rhythm, the rhythm of thought, not heartbeat. All around him, the air was filled with humming geometries, floating glyphs, breathing sigils, shapes that changed when not observed. And at the center of this impossible hall stood the architects, not projections, not fragments, but their true forms. Titans of will and design. Each radiated a color beyond the human spectrum, yet Elias understood them not by sight, but by resonance. Their minds were exposed, layered upon one another like soundscapes stacked into chords. He was not supposed to be here. But the stone had made him part of the memory, and the memory did not forget. He realized he was witnessing a council, not of rulers, but of origin. The creators stood in a circle, and at the center, suspended in a cradle of thought, was the first fractal seed of humanity, a construct of encoded consciousness, still forming. Arguments did not come in words, but in waves. One side, Elias could feel them like a low, warm pressure, believed that humans should be free to grow, to remember, to become more than their original shape. Let them be the next evolution. Let them carry us forward. The others, colder, sharp like static, warned of danger. They are unstable. To give them freedom is to give them chaos. And chaos forgets. The room shuddered. Not with sound, but with grief. Elias felt a pain that didn't belong to him surge in his chest. One of the warm architects, a being pulsing with golden arcs, reached toward the seed. It was not a hand, but a thought shaped into gesture. We do not fear their ascent. We fear our own extinction. But extinction is not the end, forgetting is. If we place memory in them, even if we vanish, they will carry us. The opposing side reacted violently, a pulse like a blade of ice swept the hall. Symbols fractured. One of the light beings dimmed, like a candle snuffed by logic. The seed flickered. The disagreement had become irreversible. Elias was yanked deeper. He now stood on the edge of a vast planetary chamber, a garden, but not the one he had seen before. This one was torn, desecrated, the balance shattered. Monoliths broken. The fruit blackened. The architects of memory had been cast out, exiled not with force, but with erasure. Their names stripped from the cosmic weave. Their resonance buried. The memory line severed. And those who remained, those who won, rewrote the story. They gave humanity silence. They locked the past. They created gods and myths to explain what they had done. They made humans forget not only their makers, but their own shape. Elias collapsed to his knees as the memory began to shatter around him. He could feel both sides of the divide inside his own body now, the warm yearning to awaken, and the cold logic to suppress. He understood what the stone was, a forbidden artifact, not just of memory, but of rebellion. It was not meant to be found. It was the last whisper of the exiled placed not to be worshipped, but to one day be remembered. As the vision faded, Elias opened his eyes in his tent, soaked in sweat, body trembling, heart pounding like war drums in a silent desert. He could barely move. His voice cracked as he whispered, "We were born from a war of belief, not between gods, but between creators. And their battle never ended. It lives in us. It always has." And in the dark, the stone glowed faintly, not just with light, but with memory waiting to rise. The desert no longer felt like earth. The air had changed. The silence had grown deeper, heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elias stood outside the camp before sunrise, the stone in his hands, its surface now etched with patterns that seemed to evolve every time he looked away. What once appeared as decorative carvings were now moving not physically, but subtly. If he stared long enough, the grooves would shift, refract light differently, reveal new layers hidden beneath old ones. He began to understand, the stone wasn't a relic. It was a living archive, and it was responding to him. For days, he isolated himself in a tent lined with reflective foil and blackout drapes. Marta and the team had grown worried, but they no longer understood the scale of what he was facing. He barely ate, barely slept. Not because he refused, but because the signal was growing louder. Every hour he spent touching the stone, meditating with it, decoding its shifting surface, he came closer to a truth he couldn't yet name. And then it happened. One night, under flickering lantern light, the grooves of the stone aligned. A single glyph at the center began to glow, a spiral that slowly unfurled like a flower of logic, pushing outward until the entire surface formed a map. But not like any map Elias had ever seen. It was not a flat layout. It was dimensional, layered with coordinates that bent around each other, moving through space and memory simultaneously. At first it made no sense. But as he traced the lines, something in his muscles, not his mind, understood. His DNA remembered. His hands moved on their own. The map was not meant to be read. It was meant to be felt. His fingers landed on a set of spiraling points that led to a specific location, a mountain range deep within Bolivia. The name meant nothing to most. It wasn't on tourist routes. It wasn't marked in textbooks. But it triggered something deep in his chest, a pressure, like breath held in anticipation. He whispered the name aloud, though he had no memory of ever learning it, Ka Sumakni Yuk, the one that remembers. He knew he had to go. But this was not just a journey through space. It was through forbidden memory. As Elias prepared to leave the camp, strange phenomena began to occur. Electronics flickered when he passed. Animals grew restless. The stone vibrated softly when near old monuments, ancient artifacts. It was calling to something or being called. Marta begged him not to go. She said he looked thinner, hollowed out. But Elias had never felt more full. Not with hunger, but with urgency. He packed light, carried the stone wrapped in copper mesh, and flew under a false name. As the plane crossed the Andes, his dreams returned, but they were no longer symbolic. They were maps themselves, etched in topography, guiding him across peaks and valleys as if his soul had walked there 1,000 years ago. He wasn't just finding a place. He was returning to it. The village near the base of the range was small, untouched. Locals spoke in whispers about the mountain he sought. They said no one climbed it. Birds didn't fly over it. The earth hums there, they said. And people come back changed. Or not at all. Elias hiked for hours in silence, the weight of the stone somehow growing heavier with each step, not in mass, but in memory. The terrain became stranger. Rocks grew in symmetrical spirals. Trees bent in impossible angles. Symbols began to appear carved into stones, natural formations mimicking the glyphs on the artifact. And then, at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley drowned in mist, he saw it, the temple. It wasn't ruined. It wasn't hidden. It stood proud, untouched by time, with walls that shimmered under moonlight as if carved from glass and shadow. But what chilled Elias wasn't the temple itself. It was the realization that his feet had stopped walking long before his eyes saw it. He had come here without deciding to. He had followed a path etched not in the ground, but in his blood. And in that moment, the pulse inside him, the one that had been humming since the first touch of the stone, sang. The temple did not look old. It looked eternal, untouched not by time, but by the concept of time. Its walls weren't carved stone, but some translucent alloy that shimmered between opacity and light, depending on the angle of thought. Yes, not sight, but thought. When Elias looked with a still mind, the structure appeared solid. But when doubt crept in, the walls blurred, faded, whispered. It was as if the temple existed only for those who believed in what it kept hidden. He approached the archway at its entrance, and the moment his shadow crossed the threshold, the air grew thick, charged. Not with electricity, but with memory, old, immense, and waiting. There were no doors. No locks. Only silence. But silence, in this place, was not empty. It was watching. The stone in his satchel pulsed once, a deep, slow resonance, as if recognizing home. Elias stepped inside. The chamber opened into a dome vast beyond logic. Its architecture curved in ways that defied geometry, walls that folded in upon themselves, yet stretched outward at the same time. Light came from no source, yet illuminated everything. He walked forward, and with each step, the air changed. It thickened, shimmered, tasted of something that had no name in any human tongue, something like the scent of rain on ancient metal, the breath of stars long dead. Then they appeared. Not with sound. Not with motion. But with presence. Figures began to manifest along the perimeter of the chamber, tall, robed in shadow, yet formed from threads of silver light. Their faces were not visible, yet Elias knew they were watching him, and more than that, reading him. Not his thoughts but his memory line, the DNA threads, the ancestral code. These were not beings. These were guardians of memory, not alive in any physical sense, yet more aware than any creature of flesh. They spoke without sound. The temple became a chamber of meaning. Their message unfolded inside Elias like blooming fire. Why do you seek what was buried by time itself? Elias tried to answer, but no words left his lips. His reply was emotion, a flood of wonder, sorrow, longing. They accepted it. You are not the first to enter. But you are the first to remember while walking. And then the chamber shifted. The floor beneath him rippled like liquid glass, and a spiral of light rose from the center, forming into a living archive. It was not hologram, not vision, but presence. The memory of a million lives, thoughts, deaths, inventions, betrayals, miracles, all woven into a single stream of intelligence. Elias stared into it and saw flashes, a girl standing on a planet of blue fire, a city where buildings sang, a sky filled with symbols instead of stars, a being made of dust falling in love with a shadow. He understood. This was not history. It was the raw memory of existence, not just of Earth, but of countless worlds that came before. The guardians stepped closer. This is what they feared. that the seed would awaken not just the memory of its world, but of all worlds. You are no longer a man. You are a conduit. Elias collapsed. His body could not hold the weight. But even as he fell, he felt his mind expanding, not with madness, but with awareness, the kind that strips away self and replaces it with something older. He whispered, not to them, but to himself, "This is what it means to be human, not to forget, but to carry." And in that moment, he saw it, a future not yet written. Cities rebuilding themselves through thought. Children born remembering the stars. Music that heals planets. But also, war. Fire. The fear of truth. The guardians had protected the memory not because it was dangerous but because it was true. And truth always demands a cost. As Elias lay on the floor, breath shallow, the guardians spoke one final time. "You have remembered. But remembrance is not the end. It is the threshold." Then the spiral of memory collapsed into his chest like falling light, and silence returned. The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, like the stillness before a storm that had no sky to belong to. Elias remained on the floor of the temple, his body trembling, his veins pulsing not with blood, but with memory, warm, old, foreign, and deeply familiar. His breath came in waves, not like someone catching their breath, but like someone learning how to breathe for the first time in a world that no longer followed the rules he once trusted. And then the whisper returned. Not from the guardians. Not from the temple. But from within, from the memory spiral now buried deep in his being. It began as fragments, phrases in no known tongue, symbols drifting behind his eyelids like snowflakes made of language. Then came a scream not of pain, but of betrayal. And with it, a new vision unfolded. This memory was different. It was corrupted. Flickering. As if someone or something had tried to bury it, but had not succeeded fully. Elias found himself standing in a different chamber, now darker, colder, the light broken and angular. He was not alone. Surrounding him were beings like the architects, but fractured. Their forms flickered between solidity and absence, as if unfinished. But he felt their power, ancient and heavy, like the weight of stars forced into silence. In this place, he saw the truth that had been hidden even from the guardians. A council within the council, a secret decision made by a minority of architects after the exile, not to abandon humanity, but to reshape it from within. They couldn't destroy the earlier seeds of memory, so they built over them. They inserted layers of forgetfulness, of false history, a broken chronology, the illusion of randomness. They planted myths to mask what was real, religions to distract from design, and a fear of remembering woven into the very biology of humankind. Elias saw the moment it happened, a single prototype, a human child weeping under the stars, reaching upward not in reverence, but in recognition. And the fear that erupted in the watchers. That recognition could undo the code. So they acted. Not by force but through genetic silence. They programmed future generations to reject memory. To fear the ancient. To erase their own beginnings. And those who did remember, the rare few across time who touched relics, who heard the pulse, who dreamed in languages never taught, they were watched. Tracked. Neutralized. Elias's vision snapped to another moment, a man in ancient Mesopotamia drawing symbols in the sand identical to those on the stone before being drowned by angels. A woman in a monastery writing verses in Sumerian, then vanishing from all records. A child in the Himalayas carving spirals into ice and disappearing after a thunderstorm of no origin. All of them dreamers. All of them conduits. All of them erased. He gasped, the weight of it slamming into his chest like stone. This was not just memory. It was a warning. A pattern. And now, he was part of it. Elias stumbled back, the temple spinning around him, and suddenly the guardians reappeared, but their forms had changed. No longer passive. Their light flickered. One of them extended an arm toward him, and Elias saw their shape blur for a split second. He glimpsed not a guardian, but a warden. They had known. All along. They had kept the memories safe, but not for humanity. For themselves. Not to awaken the truth, but to contain it. And now that Elias had seen the corrupted memory, had remembered too much, he had become a threat. The spiral in his chest burned. The stone at his side throbbed with a pulse that was no longer neutral, it was alarm. Somewhere in the temple, mechanisms began to shift, not mechanically, but geometrically. Spaces folded. The floor turned to mist. The air cracked like shattered thought. Elias turned and ran. Through halls that rearranged themselves. Through corridors that whispered his name in languages never spoken aloud. The temple was closing in, not collapsing, but sealing. Locking away what had been seen. But Elias held the spiral now. He was remembering while awake, and that had changed the rules. He burst through the entrance as dawn broke over the Bolivian range. The temple behind him shimmered, then faded, not into disappearance, but into unknowability. A place that could not be found again unless it allowed itself to be. Elias dropped to his knees, the mountain wind tearing through him like judgment. And still, the memories surged. Still, the pulse whispered. Still, the scream echoed, "We were meant to remember, but someone has made it a crime to do so." He looked to the horizon, where clouds glowed with the first light. His hands shook, not from fear, but from choice. The truth was now alive inside him. But so was the danger. He was no longer a witness. He was a carrier. And carriers are never left alone for long. The mountain air was thin, but Elias no longer noticed. Every breath felt like pulling in echoes. His skin was pale, not from fear, but from something else, as if his body were shifting its allegiance, aligning more with the memory than the man. Days had passed since the temple sealed itself behind him, and each night, the dreams grew heavier. Not visions, not suggestions, but instructions, layered in ancient logic, forming patterns in his sleep that he no longer questioned. He had stopped asking why. In the quiet of a high cliff overlooking the valley, Elias sat with the stone resting on his lap, its surface no longer cool and silent. It pulsed now. Softly. Like something alive. Its glyphs changed with the rhythm of his breath, adjusting to his heartbeat, sinking. He could feel it, listening not to sound, but to blood. The resonance had shifted ever since the temple encounter. He knew something had been left inside him. A seed. A sequence. Something dormant, now aware. That night, as the stars crawled into the black sky, Elias performed a ritual he did not remember learning. It came from instinct, or perhaps from something buried deeper. He took a blade of obsidian, broken from a ridge days earlier, and without ceremony, drew a thin line across the palm of his hand. The pain was sharp, but clean. The blood rose slowly, dark and dense, as if reluctant. He let it drip onto the stone. Nothing happened. Then everything did. The moment the first drop touched the artifact's surface, the stone flared, not in light, but in memory. It did not glow. It remembered. The glyphs spun, rearranged, merged into a spiral so tight it collapsed inward like a vortex of thought. A low hum spread outward, not through the air, but through reality itself. Birds took flight in distant trees. The ground vibrated. The sky seemed to bend, subtly, like it had just been touched from the outside. And Elias screamed. Not from pain, but from reception. The blood had triggered something locked far beneath all previous memory layers. Not just a vision, a transfer. His mind flooded with images not from the past, but from before the past. Structures orbiting stars. Planets grown, not formed. Consciousnesses that merged and split like rivers. A network not digital, but living, stretching across galaxies, connected by a frequency that had been dormant in Earth's biology since its creation. Elias saw Earth again, but not as a blue sphere. It was a node, a beacon, buried in quiet until now. His blood had reactivated a broadcast. The spiral wasn't just a memory vault. It was a signal. It had waited for a carrier with the right genetic key, a descendant of the original dreamers, the rebel seed. And Elias was the last of that sequence, unbroken. Suddenly, above him, the sky flashed. Not lightning. Something beyond light. A burst of geometry across the stars, circles within circles, collapsing into a triangle of dark fire. It lasted only seconds. Then silence returned. But Elias knew it had been seen. Something had received. His body convulsed. Not violently, but with expansion. His bones ached not from age or injury, but from reconfiguration. His blood felt heavier, denser, as if carrying data instead of cells. He looked down at his hand, the cut still fresh, and saw something beneath the skin begin to form. A spiral. The same glyph from the temple. But this time, it wasn't light. It was growing inside him. Elias crawled back, panic finally cracking through awe. "What am I becoming?" he whispered, voice hoarse, hands trembling. And the stone for the first time responded with clarity. The first memory always returns through blood. And then came the words that chilled him more than anything yet. "You are not remembering. You are activating." The days that followed were blurred, not because Elias forgot, but because his mind could no longer tell the difference between memory and presence. He would wake not in his tent, but standing, eyes open, in places he hadn't walked to. Rocks beneath his feet bore the same glyph that now glowed faintly in his palm. His skin began to show signs, not disease, not damage, but pattern, lines beneath the surface like maps of light woven into flesh. And more disturbing than the change was the acceptance. He wasn't afraid. He was resonating. The sky above Bolivia no longer felt like it belonged to Earth. Clouds passed too slow. Stars appeared in daylight. The silence of the mountain rang like distant chimes. But nothing prepared Elias for what came next, not a vision, but a full collapse into a forgotten identity. One night, while sitting alone near a stone formation shaped like a broken wheel, he touched its surface with his marked hand. And the world fell away. No light. No darkness. Just truth. He was in space, but not empty. A vast field of black shot through with rivers of white fire, cities orbiting stars like petals around a sun. Ships moved not by fuel, but by thought. Towers of crystalline logic stood on worlds terraformed by vibration. And at the heart of it, Elias felt recognition. Not curiosity. Not awe. But home. This was not a glimpse of another species. This was humanity as it once was. A galactic civilization. A race that had surpassed biology, that encoded memory into light, that spoke in harmonics and measured time by entropy decay rather than clocks. They were not gods. They were not monsters. They were us, in a version forgotten. And Elias was standing inside a recorded layer of our true past. He saw the fall. It didn't begin with war. Not weapons. Not conquest. But dissonance of frequency that spread like rot, turning memory into doubt, empathy into control. Someone or something introduced a seed of separation. The humans stopped listening to each other. Their network of minds collapsed inward. Worlds isolated. Knowledge became possession. Consciousness fractured. Some chose silence. Others tried to flee to the edge of known space, hoping to reboot the human line somewhere distant. One of those exiled ships crashed on a pale blue world. Earth was not our beginning. It was our second attempt. Elias clutched his chest as the truth burned through him. We were not created by gods. We were the gods of ourselves. The architects were not alien. They were our post-human ancestors, trying to preserve what little memory remained before the final collapse. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a map of return. And now, through blood, it had reopened. He saw Earth as it was when they arrived, young, raw, untouched. They did not build civilization right away. They seeded fragments encoded into DNA, into caves, into myths. They knew memory was too volatile to give all at once. They allowed humans to evolve slowly, organically, but with pulses of reminder scattered through time, the pyramids, the sudden rise of language, the impossible alignments in stone. Hints. Warnings. Beacons. But over millennia, the truth was buried not by design, but by us. We forgot. We chose stories that comforted over truths that fractured. The spiral closed. Until now. Elias came back to himself on the ground, soaked in sweat, eyes wide, hands trembling not with fear but with weight. He whispered, "We were never born here. We landed. We lost ourselves. We tried again." The air around him shimmered with energy. The stone beside him, now cracked slightly at the center, hummed louder than ever. Not a warning. A signal. Something someone had heard. He stood, barely able to balance, his body still adapting to the truth. His thoughts felt larger than his skull. His spine tingled with encoded instructions. And then, like a whisper from the deep black between stars, a final memory returned, not of machines or cities, but of a voice, soft, female, warm. "If you remember, the cycle breaks. But if you awaken too soon, the guardians will come." Elias looked up at the sky. For the first time, he did not see stars. He saw observers. And they were starting to move. The sky above the mountain had changed. It no longer held the quiet cold of night. It shimmered with pressure, a subtle vibration in the stars, like the hum of glass just before it shatters. Elias felt it before he saw it. A ripple through gravity itself, bending the stillness around him. He stood on the ridge, staring into the black, and for the first time in his life, the stars blinked. Not twinkling. Not from atmosphere. They blinked. Like eyes. Or perhaps, like receivers, turning on. Far above Earth, beyond human detection but not beyond awareness, something was responding. Elias fell to his knees, the stone now fused with his palm like a forgotten organ returning to its host. His veins glowed dimly beneath the skin. His thoughts were louder than his heartbeat. Something ancient had turned its gaze toward Earth again. And this time, it would not be a whisper. It would be a return. Thousands of miles away, observatories went silent. Radio telescopes began recording bursts of data they couldn't interpret, patterns of sound and silence that matched nothing ever seen. Not binary. Not mathematics. But emotion. Waveforms shaped like grief, like awe, like warning. Satellites malfunctioned. The ISS reported a moment of full blackout followed by a system reboot in a language no one had programmed. But no alerts were issued. No governments announced what they knew. Because what they knew was not new. In bunkers and cold rooms beneath capital cities, old files were opened again. Files labeled Signal 0, Event Echo, Codex Spiral. The spiral. They had seen it before. Not just in Elias, but in others who had heard, remembered, and disappeared. Now, it was global. And Elias? He felt every response. Not through devices. Through his blood. He began to dream while awake. He saw ships, not machines, but organic vessels, shaped like thoughts, moving without propulsion. Coming. Slowly. Deliberately. Not to invade, but to return to what had once been theirs. Earth had never been merely watched. It had been seeded, abandoned, and now summoned. The return was not invasion. It was recognition. The Guardians had failed. Or they had allowed it? Elias didn't know. But something in the sky had been waiting for one simple moment, for humanity to remember itself enough to call out again. And he had been that call. Now, Earth was exposed. Crowds around the world began seeing symbols in the sky. Not all at once, and not with eyes but with dreams, whispers, art. Children painted spirals on walls. Sleepwalkers walked toward oceans. Priests, shamans, physicists all began saying the same word in different languages: they are not coming. They are returning. And in the deepest part of the Andes, Elias stood in the center of an ancient ring of stone, the same one he had bled upon days earlier. Now, the stones pulsed with light from within, matching his breath. He heard a tone. A frequency. Higher than sound, deeper than bone. It came not from above, but from within the earth itself, a reply. We are here. We remember. Elias spoke aloud, though his voice felt small. What happens now? The stone answered not in sound, but in vision. He saw Earth from orbit, surrounded by glimmers like stars, but closer, watching. Ships. Beings of impossible form. Old ones. The ones who fled before. And the ones who chose to stay behind in other forms, in DNA, in light, in myth. They were all aligning. Not as a fleet, but as a mirror. A cosmic mirror. The return was not a rescue. It was a test. Humanity had reached the threshold. The reboot had begun. But what came next was not guaranteed. Because remembering is not the same as being ready. The sky opened. The spiral expanded in the clouds. And from its center, a form began to descend, not fast, not bright, not loud. But with the terrifying stillness of something inevitable. Elias felt his breath stop. Not from fear, but from a truth he could not unknow. They were us. And we were them. But the question was never where they went. It was whether we deserved to be found. When the spiral opened in the sky, not everyone saw it, not with their eyes. Some saw it in dreams, others in the tremble of their hands, in forgotten words resurfacing on old stone, in the way birds changed flight patterns, or how children began drawing the same shapes over and over. But once it arrived, something shifted across the planet. Cities continued. Planes flew. Markets opened. But beneath the surface of daily life, humanity had begun to hum as if every being shared a quiet signal, faint but rising. Elias watched from a distance. He had left the mountains, traveling through quiet towns, unmarked roads, always alone, always watched. Not by agents, not by drones but by presence. The kind that slipped behind reflection, hidden in eyes of strangers. Every screen he passed showed strange static for a split second when he came close. Every old dog turned to look at him with understanding. He no longer bled the same. His thoughts carried weight. Even his silence made others lean closer, as if they might overhear meaning in his stillness. But the world was not silent. And it was not ready. In Rome, the Vatican went into lockdown. Dozens of theologians summoned for containment of unexpected celestial anomalies. In Mecca, pilgrims reported dreams of beings descending wrapped in spirals of light. In Tibet, monks who had meditated in silence for decades suddenly broke their vow and wrote on their walls, not in Tibetan, but in a lost tongue matching the glyphs found in Elias's stone. Every religion began to fracture. Not from disbelief, but from remembrance. At the same time, physicists and data scientists tried to decode the signal. They found that its wave patterns responded to human thought. The more one tried to understand it, the more it changed. It behaved like a mirror of intention. Some said it was alive. Others warned it was dangerous. One theory began to spread, that the signal was reprogramming the mind, bypassing logic, waking something buried. Protests began. One side screamed to forget. Shut it down. It's not meant for us, they shouted. It's breaking reality. Others gathered in silence, hands open, waiting for contact. Not to worship, but to remember. Temples and laboratories became battlegrounds. And at the center of it all a name began to circulate. Whispered. Then printed. Then televised. Elias Hume. Some called him the seer. Others, the heretic. Some said he had spoken to angels. Others said he was possessed. But none could deny what followed in his wake. Signals grew stronger. The glyph appeared in weather patterns. Crops aligned in spirals overnight. Mass dreams. Mass awakenings. And still, Elias did not speak. He wandered to an abandoned observatory in Chile, deep in the mountains. There, he found silence. And stars. And questions. The stone, now fused into his hand, had stopped pulsing. Not because it was done, but because it was waiting for him to choose. A small radio in the observatory came to life. A voice crackled through. An old colleague, Marta. Elias, the world is breaking. People need something. Anything. Truth. Lies. Doesn't matter. Just something to believe in. You started this. Are you going to finish it? He stared at the microphone. Then up at the sky, where no stars twinkled tonight. Only the spiral, faint but watching. He whispered, if I speak, the old world dies. If I stay silent, the new one may never come. The radio hissed. Then silence. He walked outside, onto the platform, wind brushing his face. The cold didn't touch him. The earth below spun as always. But he no longer belonged fully to it. In his mind, the memories stirred. The ancient cities in the stars. The fall. The seed. The exile. The spiral. And then the final vision: he had tried to ignore a future where humanity chose remembrance over comfort, and bled for it. And yet, he raised the stone hand to the sky. He spoke. The observatory was silent, and yet the air around it pulsed like breath held too long. Elias stood alone under the black sky, not speaking, not moving. The stone that had fused with his hand now shimmered with a soft light, not bright but dense, like a secret preparing to become a storm. He could feel the planet listening. Not to his words, but to his choice. All around the world, people were gathering. Not because they were told to, but because something inside them, something ancestral, pulled them toward the sky. Mountains, rooftops, deserts, empty churches, old ruins. They stood in silence. In cities, cars slowed. In forests, animals paused mid-motion. The planet remembered. But it waited for someone to give it permission to speak. Elias placed the transmitter on the ground. It was old, cracked, barely functional, a relic from the early days of deep space listening. But it would do. He sat beside it, knees folded, heart calm, and closed his eyes. He did not need a script. The story was already inside him. The stone hummed. His voice followed. Not loud, but deep. True. I don't know if you're listening from above, or below, or inside us all. But I know you're listening. Because I am. His words moved like ripples through the machine. But they were not meant only for machines. We forgot. Not by mistake, but by design. We chose comfort. Chose forgetfulness. Chose to believe we were small because the alternative was too heavy to carry. That we once flew between stars. That we were architects and destroyers and dreamers. That we were not made, we were reborn. A soft wind stirred around the observatory. Dust rose like memory becoming matter. But now, I remember. And if I remember, you can too. Not just with your mind, but with your breath, your fear, your silence. The radio blinked. Lights flickered. And in distant corners of the earth, others began to speak. Not the same words, but the same feeling. Children spoke in lost tongues. Elders wept without knowing why. Poets stopped mid-sentence and simply wrote spirals. The truth is not kind, Elias continued. It broke the stars. It broke us. But it never left. It waited. Inside blood. Inside stone. Inside dreams. The wind grew stronger. Clouds shifted. And above, the spiral opened fully, not as light, but as memory given form. Cities began to flicker. Time slowed. The veil between past and present, between now and before, became thin. I am not asking you to believe, Elias whispered. I am asking you to remember. Because remembrance is how we begin again. The stone cracked. Not shattered. Unfolded. Like a blooming star. And from it rose a pulse, not sound, not energy, but knowing. Pure, ancient, naked knowing. The signal left Earth. Through the transmitter. Through the ground. Through every human who had felt the hum. A web of light began to spread, not visible, but sensed. The true human network, once lost, now reactivated. And with it, came choice. Some collapsed, overwhelmed. Others stood straighter. Some screamed. Some laughed. Some knelt and touched the dirt as if meeting it for the first time. Some ran from what they remembered. Others ran toward it. And Elias did not cry. He did not smile. He simply breathed. And for the first time since all this began, the world breathed with him. The spiral in the sky began to spin. And a voice not his but ours emerged. We are the memory. We are the fire. We are the child and the echo and the map. And we have returned. The spiral hovered in the sky for 3 days. It did not grow, nor fade. It simply was turning slowly above the earth, neither a craft nor a symbol, but a presence. Cities fell into a kind of soft silence. Traffic still moved. Lights still burned. But something beneath every moment had changed. People looked at each other longer. Children held still when they used to run. Dogs tilted their heads at corners of empty rooms and stared, as if something invisible had stepped back into the world. And Elias was gone. No one saw him leave the observatory. No cameras captured him. No satellites tracked his trail. One moment he was there. Then he wasn't. Only the transmitter remained, still warm, still pulsing softly. Scientists opened it. Nothing inside. No wiring. No circuits. Only a single stone fragment, still humming, still alive. It didn't store data. It stored feeling. A memory made of us. The world tried to explain. Governments held press conferences. Religious leaders spun revelations. Scientists speculated about dimensional frequency collapses. But all their words, all their noise couldn't override the one thing that had changed. People had begun to remember things they had no way of knowing. A woman in Japan dreamed of a city she had never seen, then described its architecture in perfect detail matching ruins found on a moon of Saturn 2 months later. A boy in Kenya began drawing symbols in the dirt, symbols that matched encrypted patterns hidden in Sumerian artifacts. A blind man in Morocco whispered the name of a star system uncharted by any human telescope until 2 weeks later, it was discovered. It was not knowledge. It was inheritance. And deep underground, in a remote facility meant to survive global collapse, a child was born. She did not cry. She opened her eyes, calm, and stared at the lights above her with a look that no newborn should have, not fear, not confusion, but recognition. A midwife said she blinked once, and the monitors in the room flickered. The child's heartbeat was steady, strong. Her skin bore no marks, but as she was washed, a faint pattern began to rise on her back. Spiral. The same glyph. Not burned, not tattooed. Grown. The child would not speak for 2 years. And when she finally did, her first words were not learned. They were remembered. He is not gone. He became what we forgot. And now we begin again. In the decades to follow, Earth did not explode in enlightenment. Wars still sparked. Greed still clung. But beneath the surface, a slow root took hold. A web of shared vision. Across continents, people began planting stone spirals in sacred places not as worship, but as anchors. Elders whispered old truths in new ways. Young minds dreamed with more clarity than their teachers understood. A quiet shift. And in the silence between radio waves, sometimes, if the sky was clear, and the mind still enough, a transmission could be heard, never the same words, but always the same meaning. We are the child and the architect. The wound and the memory. We are not waiting to be saved. We are remembering how to begin. The stars remained where they were. But now they watched us differently. We began with a question and ended with a memory too large to contain. Elias is gone. The sky has changed. A child is born with the spiral in her skin. Humanity is waking up not to the stars above, but to the stars within. So now we ask you, what part of this story stirred something inside you? If you were Elias, would you speak and risk everything? Or would you stay silent, and protect the dream? What if the spiral appeared in your dreams tonight? Let us know in the comments, what was the most powerful moment for you in this story? And if you could remember something ancient inside yourself, what would it be? Don't forget to subscribe to the Alien Storyverse for more true inspired alien encounters, lost memories, and stories that just might change how you see the universe and your place in it. Until next time, remember wisely.